Hey everyone, and welcome to the College Chaps podcast. On this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about the news because, as everyone knows, the college football season is ended. But does it ever really end? And the news just keeps on coming. So we're going to talk about some of the highlights. But first, we are the College Chaps, and I am joined by the dynamic duo of Ollie and Alex. How are you both, gentlemen?
We're dynamic and we are a duo, George. So that
Factually
introduction was
correct. Factually
act-
correct.
the first thing that's factually been correctly said in 2025 on this podcast, I believe. Yeah, I'm good. Hawaii started spring practice for the 2025 football season yesterday. So football, you're right, George. Football never does stop.
Why so early? Why so early? Why are they up so early?
Hawaii always is. It's probably presumably the heat. Like presumably the heat in Hawaii is, or rain or something. I don't know. But Hawaii is always a good chunk before everyone else, and obviously they play week zero as well.
Well, I mean,
Um,
spring also refers to the semester, right? Rather than the time of year. This is spring semester. So spring practice happens at some point during spring semester, right? So
yeah, the rest of the programs don't start till a little bit later. Hawaii is always like ahead of the game. I think it's I'm guessing it's a heat thing, or do they have monsoons in? Because
yeah,
everyone else's
monsoon or
spring games like
hurricane,
April. Yeah, that must be it. That
probably.
must be it.
Yes. No, it's good. It's good to be back. I am hoping that my general manager doesn't watch this podcast on YouTube, considering I'm sitting here with the wrong kit supplier on in the office at work. But you know, it is what it is. Um, this quarter zip is nicer than my newer quarter zip, so I've got it on. You know, they're not gonna listen. They're not gonna watch, so it doesn't matter. But I'm excited to be back and talking college football with you, talking college football coaches with you, because that's something that I am way too invested in. Like, sad. It's almost sad how invested I am in coordinators and coaches.
Great segue into many of the segments as Alex has let the cat out of the bag. We're going to talk about some of the coaching changes that are happening or some of the coaching changes that haven't happened, which have caught us by surprise. But let's start with coordinators who just seem to be jumping ship left, right, and centre. There's a theme just now about some going to the NFL, some coming back from the NFL. Guess the headline was Jim Knowles leaving Ohio State to go to Penn State, because I think you would look at all the other coaches and you would make a general assumption that they were moving on to a better job. Now, that's not to say that Penn State's not a better job, but he's leaving the national champions to go to Penn State. I guess my question to you both was really the money that's being paid to a lot of these coordinators. And I read today that Jim Knowles has been paid north of $3 million. He's got some add-ons. I know it's all ifs, buts, and maybes, but that would push him into the four territory, um, which I think is something like it would make him higher paid member of staff than something like 48 college football coaches, which is a remarkable stat, to be honest. My question to you both then is, in this age where we may be moving to a revenue sharing model, can this absurdity of high paid salaries for coaches continue? I'll leave it at that.
Obviously, the revenue sharing model is capped, so the bigger schools are always going to be able to still afford to pay out money to high ranking coaches, because it's going to be capped at a kind of a median level where a lot of the schools can still play. Um, so I don't think we're going away from this. If the best schools want the best coaches, they're going to keep paying.
Well, sorry to interrupt. Can they, Alex? Because we saw that Texas made a loss. Sorry, Texas made a small profit, and there was a school who made a
Yeah,
loss this
Ohio
year.
State. Ohio State lost $10 million
Right.
last year, as a athletic department, which that can't continue. Maybe boosters make up some of that loss, but at the same time, they don't have that deep of a pocket. These boosters are not going to lose their whole personal fortune on athletic departments, and these universities. Sport always makes a loss, right? everywhere in the world and everywhere in the NCAA, apart from men's football, men's basketball, women's volleyball, most and even a lot of the programs in those sports make a loss. They're loss making. So these programs being loss making is not the end of the world. Losing being $10 million in the hole as a whole athletic department, that's not great. So I do think that we're going to hit critical mass, but I still think coaches will still be well paid, and the best schools will still pay the most money to the coaches, but that might come down from some of the numbers that we see right now.
Ollie, there's been rightly so a focus on head coaches being paid lots of money. We've seen that in the SEC, where Nick Saban was getting paid $12 million a year. These coordinators worth some of these huge contracts that are being paid out just now?
Yeah, and just touch on your first point. I think what you'll see more and more is, and I think we've touched on this in previous episodes, or certainly been a common story in college football media, is I think what you will see is coaches getting paid, guaranteed money being woven in less into coach contracts, because what you've seen as a revenue sharing comes into play is the conversation around whether coaches can actually programs can afford to fire coaches and move on from coaches left, right, and centre under this new model. And a lot of people pointing to Mike Norvell at Florida State as being almost too expensive to eat his contract and bring in someone of a level to drive that program because of the revenue sharing situation. So I think that's the key thing where that's concerned. You look at, let's use Jim Knowles as an excuse because we kicked off with Jim Knowles. Not as an excuse. That's the wrong word. Example. Let's use Jim Knowles as an example for the offensive coordinator conversation, because yeah, you're right. He's the highest paid offensive coordinator and the highest paid coordinator, full stop, in the history of college football. And there's a reason for it, right? You look at, and we talked about it before the national championship or after the national championship, I can't remember when we talked about it, but the reason Ohio State won the national championship is because of what they did on defense. We can talk about what Chip Kelly brought to the offense. We can talk about Ryan Day as a head coach. Jim Knowles came into that program at the end of the 2021 season where Ohio State had one of the worst defenses in college football. And they've just won the national championship on the strength of one of the best defenses in college football. And that's what Penn State's $3.2 million or whatever it was base salary is buying them. It's interesting because Penn State actually defensively, apart from big games, Penn State's defense hasn't been the issue. Like the inability to turn up on offense has been the big problem. He inherits a Penn State defense, which is way, way better than anything that he walked into that Ohio State defensive room in 2021. So it's interesting. It's a big swinging dick move for Penn State because you bring in the national championship defensive coordinator. You bring him in from a Big Ten conference rival. As you alluded to, George, it's not necessarily an upward move. In a lot of respects, it's a sideways or backwards move for Jim Knowles, but it gives him that opportunity to prove that he was such a pivotal part of that Ohio State success, because if he could deliver a national championship to Penn State, it'd be worth every single penny. So I do think a guy like Jim Knowles is absolutely worth the money. There'll be some other offensive and defensive coordinators who prove to be absolutely not worth that money moving forward. But I think Jim Knowles is a prime example of a guy who that is tangible, like the difference he's made to that program, and why would you pay him any less than you'd pay Ryan Day for that success?
And there is also on the Jim Knowles side of it that he now goes to work for a guy in James Franklin who doesn't comically dye his facial hair, so he hasn't got to look at that shiny black beard for the rest of the days. That's a big perk for me, right? Like if you're trading one head coach for the other, like I don't have to look at something that's probably going to make me laugh every day. Just that would be quite hard in a professional environment to keep.
Yeah, team meetings.
Well, Ohio State reportedly offered him something in the ballpark of the same sort of amount, so that clearly was a defining factor for Jim Knowles. Was the just for men effect of
Well,
Ryan Day.
he had some interesting words to say about Ohio State, didn't he? Right? I mean, it doesn't look as if it was necessarily a um, an amicable parting of the ways as such. In many ways, it could, to Alex's point, it could be construed as quite a wise move because if he creates something at Penn State, and listen, we know they've been kicking about for seasons. We almost make a living out of the fact that Penn State are kicking about for a period of time, but haven't made that breakthrough. But they make the breakthrough because a lot of coordinators will move to a head coaching role, right? And that isn't always the best move for these people. So, moving across to Penn State and then maybe doing something with that might be end up being quite lucrative. A head coach that let's talk about head coach that we've talked about in the past is Matt Rhule. And some interesting news this week that Rhule had quite a bit to say about tampering, as a lot of coaches do, but so much so that he is considering cancelling the public spring practice. That just seemed like a lot of hyperbole to me, to be honest. I think it just felt like a head coach wanting to make a lot of noise about stuff that's going on that he's probably participating in anyway. But what are your thoughts on there not being a public spring practice, which for a lot of teams is actually a bit of an event?
Well, I think it's less shutting it off to the public, right, and but more making sure it's not streamed
Oh,
or not on TV.
sorry, you're right. Yeah, not having it on TV.
Which I think is a good idea, But then the coaching fraternity is small, right? If there's sort of two sides to this. The only people that aren't going to see that practice are media members and members of the public that can't go to the practice. If coaches want to see film from Nebraska spring practice, they will find a way to get the film from Nebraska spring practice. Like that, the way this business works, there's so much trading of film behind the scenes. There's so many back alley deals done, so many people that know one another on different staffs that have worked together that have connections, that they will find a way, right? Someone will find a way. So, all you're doing by not having it on TV is you're hurting the chance of your athletes to start building draft profiles for the ones that are draft eligible the next year. You're losing the opportunity for those athletes to make a name for themselves and potentially secure NIL deals. And also, if you can't compete, that's the free market, right? If you've got a breakout star in your program and you can't do what you need to do to keep him there, then he's going to transfer. Right? That's his prerogative or their prerogative as an athlete. Like if their best fit is elsewhere, then they're going to go and transfer elsewhere. And I think you have to get to a point as a coach where you are so confident in the environment that you create that the lure of an extra few $1,000 in deals isn't enough to take that person away from you. And I think, it is tough with a sport like football where there's such big rosters, but they have a lot of resource, they have a lot of coaches. And I think rather than always trying to chase the next, sometimes these coaches need to look at their environment and think, how can I make this a place where athletes want to play, whether they get paid or not? And I think that is, you see a lot of athletes taking less money at the pro level to go and play in good situations for good coaches. And I think we've not reached that level of college football yet. We're still in the arms race of how can I offer this kid the most money to make sure that he plays for my team. And I think Matt Rhule needs to, rather than working out how to keep kids on his roster by denying them opportunities, he needs to work out how to keep kids on his roster by offering them opportunities.
It's a fine balancing act, isn't it, Ollie? Because he needs to market his program. There's a huge interest in Nebraska. We know that they've got a massive fan base. he's also, and I think he's already said this, he's got a difficult job in the Big Ten, being where Nebraska is and attracting kids from other parts of the country. Surely needs all the exposure that he can get for his team. And notoriously or infamously, Nebraska sells out their spring practice game. It's a huge event in that part of the world. And I know we're not talking about the game itself, but that's the kind of thing you want to be showing off. And aren't we really? We are where we are in the portal as it is, right? I mean, it's naive of them to think that the only way that teams are going to, be attracted to his players is if they see them on TV.
Yeah, you make a great point about the spring game situation with Nebraska in terms of the profile of that game. It is probably one of the more high profile spring games in terms of attendance. And you, like you say, you want to draw all eyes to the program. And Nebraska is supposed to be enjoying this rejuvenation as a national force under Matt Rhule, and that needs all the exposure it can get. And I honestly don't think that in my however many years, 6 years of doing this podcast and 4 years of covering college football for Pro Football Network and College Football Network, that I've seen anything in a spring game that has been that out of the ordinary and then translated to the college football season.
Yeah.
Like, how often do you see it? It just doesn't happen. Nebraska isn't undergoing a lot of change schematically. Dana Holgorsen got brought in at the end of the year to be offensive coordinator. Obviously, Tony White left for Florida State, so there's nothing greatly changing schematically. There's not, therefore, a whole more beneficial scheme for a defensive back, for example, or a wide receiver or tight end. Like, there isn't a guy that is going to suddenly magically come to the fore in the spring game that then, James Franklin or Ryan Day or Kalen DeBoer or, whoever, Steve Sarkisian, whatever, isn't sort of magically going to go, oh, yeah, that's the guy that we need on our roster, because the biggest teams aren't going to have a lot of drop off of talent through the transfer portal window in the spring. So they're not going to need to replace any in the spring, which is essentially the problem that Matt Rhule is referencing, is trying to get around and avoid. Is we did see last year, we did see a number of players enter the transfer portal after the spring game, because that's when the spring transfer portal window opened. How many of those were guys that legitimately had their head turned by another program in that moment? Most of the guys that enter the spring transfer portal are guys who are looking to play football and they realize they won't be after the spring game, after spring practice. They realize that they're not going to be a big part of that team as a starter moving forward, and they're looking for opportunities to start. I think that's the spring. That's what the spring transfer portal's for. And Matt Rhule cancelling the Nebraska spring game isn't going to help keep any more of those guys on his roster than it will by having it. So.
Yeah, and it's the nail on the head. It's a lot about the portal window or windows and trying to align them appropriately. A player that many wished were hitting the transfer portal isn't, and I think we can officially say that Manning mania has started. We'll probably be fed up listening to the name of Arch Manning over the coming months as the build up to the game comes along. But I think what struck me from some of the stuff that I read this week was that expectations are sky high in Texas, and Alex knows this more than anybody. Dare I say it, that Quinn Ewers was impacted by some of this last season, right? Because whenever Quinn Ewers didn't look as if he was having the best of games, the clamour for Arch Manning was just getting heavier and heavier. It does feel as if he's going to have the weight of the world on his shoulders, but perhaps he knows that he's at a very, very high profile school. But can the weight of expectations be too much for Arch Manning, do you think?
I mean, obviously it could, but I think he's had the training and he's had his uncles telling him that this is how it's going to be, probably for the last 10 years. Coming through at this point, he's ready for it. He's ready to hold that pressure on his shoulders, because at the end of the day, he's just a kid who loves to play football. So, the more that he can keep it as, just that game that he goes out and plays, the more likely he is to come out and be successful in holding off that pressure. But yeah, I think he's got the mentors to guide him. He's got people that he can turn to. He's, like I said, he's had the training to be that guy who carries a program. Right? I'd be more worried about a kid who comes from nothing and hasn't had the help, and is maybe this uber athlete that um, has this super high recruiting grade and doesn't have the people to turn to. When you have the people to turn to, you can learn their lessons, from the mistakes that they made and not have to make the same ones yourself. And I think that puts Arch Manning in a really, really good spot um, coming into this season. He's got to go out there and prove it still. He hasn't done that yet. He's looked okay in games. There's talent there for sure. But Texas have got to do a good job of putting him in good positions, and he's got to do a good job of executing. So until that happens, until we see the season start, because you're going out there throwing against air in the spring game essentially. Yes, the defense will play hard, and they'll try and win that game, but it's going to be schemed in a way that makes him look good. There'll be lots of easy throws. There'll be lots of vanilla offense and vanilla defense in that spring game. So really, we won't know properly until the first week of the college football season this year. And that's what's exciting about this sport, is you think you know it going into week one, but you don't really know it. So I think he'll be a success, but he'll never reach the expectations that people have for him. Even if he goes on and wins a national championship for Texas and wins the Heisman, and he'll never be as good as, there'll always be someone who says you're not as good as I thought you were going to be. But I'm confident. I'm excited to watch him play, and that's what matters to me.
Well, I guess the same was said for Eli, right? That Eli could never match what Peyton had done in the game, and look how that turned out. Well, the good thing is, Ollie, that pressure is off a touch, because people have already directed their attention to the next Manning. I saw Marshall Manning throwing the ball at the Pro Bowl, so we're already scouting the next generation.
Honestly, I didn't even think this segment was going to be about Arch Manning. I presumed it was always going to be about Marshall Manning when I saw the script. But Arch is an afterthought now, really. Like, people are clamoring for Marshall Manning. If you've got a headline writer worth your salt, getting Marshall Manning into a headline is probably going to make you a pretty penny over the next 10, 15 years.
I saw one clip on Twitter followed by about 1 million after that.
Hey, look, honestly, like, you want to get a TV camera in front of Henry trying to lob his Lego cars through our TV screen, like, he's probably a better quarterback than Marshall Manning right now.
Well, you heard it first. And in the class of 2034, we'll wind this back. A couple of things I wanted to talk about before we wind up, and I think we're just going to be able to fit them in. Ollie, ESPN extended the contract with the ACC until 2036. Now, that doesn't really put to bed the issues that the conference has got, but it certainly provides some certainty in terms of who legally requires to be part of that conference in 2 years' time. But do you think a divorce is inevitable in this conference, or do you think we're going to get a period where maybe calm heads prevail and sit down and have a chat about it?
Yeah, I think the extension of the deals, to me anyway, signifies that there's a little bit of stability coming to the ACC. I think the noise that was very, very, very loud ahead of the 2024 college football season about FSU and about Clemson leaving that conference has been very quiet. It's been very quiet. I know there's a lot of legal ramifications behind what can and can't be said, but it's been very quiet. It's gone very quiet. For me, that the extension of that media rights deal kind of suggests that stability. They've kind of settled that this is how it's going to be moving forward. And I think again, it comes back to we talked about it on the show in the off season. Where's FSU going to go? Because no one wants them. So I do think that this is we're looking at a status quo for the ACC for the foreseeable future. I mean, a lot of conferences that I don't think there's a lot of status quo for going forward, including the Mountain West. Our good friend, Commissioner Navarez, kind of rowing a boat through some very, very stormy waters where the Mountain West and Pac-12 are concerned. But yeah, I think the ACC is, for me anyway, I think there's an element of stability for that going into this off season compared to the 2024 off season that we went through.
Yeah, I wonder as well if they look at Oklahoma and see how Oklahoma's fared in the SEC in year one, and they're middle of the pack. And do you want to trade Clemson? You made the college football playoff this year by winning the ACC. Do you want to trade that chance to go and be middle of the pack in the SEC? Because you probably will be, or you may be upper middle of the pack, but are you going to compete with Georgia and Alabama and Texas and LSU of football? Maybe, maybe not. And the SEC is full of sleeping giants. If Florida get on a roll, that machine starts recruiting again, and that then becomes dangerous as well. So like Tennessee, similarly, again, could very, very quickly become a top tier program or snowball into a top tier program. So I think there's a lot of sense in these top tier programs staying apart from one another in conferences. So I agree with Ollie. I think they may have seen that and stayed a little bit calmer, I think, moving forward.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? On one hand, financially, I think Clemson and Florida State and North Carolina and whoever else that might be interested in moving would jump at the chance of joining the ACC. But Clemson's just proved that you can get into the college football playoff as it currently stands, right? And as to Alex's point, that wouldn't be quite so easy moving into the conference. I'm in no way close to this. It's just stuff I was reading through the week. Maybe we need to get Eric on to talk us through it. But I don't believe that either of the schools have relinquished their lawsuits at this moment in time. I think they're still kicking about. So although you'd probably want to see that through to its conclusion, right? Because the lawsuits about their ability to leave the conference and the financial compensation they would get for doing it, right? So, that would seem sensible to take that to a conclusion, and then you know where you stand. We started this podcast off about coaches who were at the top of their game and touting their trade elsewhere for large sums of money. But we thought we'd finish the podcast on a slightly less favourable note. Trent Dilfer is 7 for 17 in 2 seasons in Birmingham, Alabama, but has been invited back for a 3rd season. That seems to have caught a number of people by surprise. Were you chaps surprised by this?
I don't know if Alex has got an opinion on this. Well, I've got quite a deep, entrenched opinion about it. So if Alex wanted to go first with whatever opinion he has, I'm more than happy to then close us out with
this is
fire breathing.
It was UAB that put out a statement, right, in like late November, early December about Trent Dilfer returning because of the quality of human being that he'd produced at UAB, right? Was that someone else? Someone did about how, team high academic scores and things under his watch, and they were going to give him another year to turn things around. Like, I hate seeing coaches get fired. That twinges me a little bit every day because, quite like to not be in that situation myself. But eventually the results, it's a results business, right? So if you can't produce the results, eventually you're going to get fired. I think I like the fact that they're giving him some time to try and build something, but that also brings with it some pressure, because if you're not building anything and they give you more time to start, you've got to start working your ass off at that point and start winning some football games. But I think he's in a tough situation. Being 7-17, even returning, he's well on the hot seat.
I'm
Go.
surprised you've got a seat left to stand on, to be honest, or sit on as you would with a seat if you want to stand on it. That shit's got to be made of charcoal by now, because Trent Dilfer for me is the head coach that I think is most inexplicably still in the job at the end of the 2024 college football season, and a large part of it is the results. But I look at a program like UAB, which has been, in previous years, has been one of the better group of five outlets that has got, has always had a pride and a tradition about it in the recent years, and has produced some really talented college football players that have gone on to, make appearances in the NFL. And I think Trent Dilfer has taken that program that was once a proud part of Group of Five football and turned it into a joke and a laughing stock. And it's the results on the field, but it's the person that he is off it as well. And you look at the sideline shenanigans that you saw with UAB this season. And coaches get help. Alex, you know this as well as anyone, though. I can't imagine you smashing someone around the head with a clipboard or anything of that nature. But coaches do get. This is a passionate sport. It's a passionate job, and sometimes it needs shouting, and sometimes it needs tender loving care. But Trent Dilfer always comes across as he's just shouting to be the loudest voice in the room. And I think the results on the field, the shenanigans off the field. You look at how Brian Vincent, who was the interim head coach there for 1 year, and all the fans wanted him, and rightly or wrongly, we talk about college football fans as being wildly, over exaggerating expectations, but they have a pulse on the program, and UAB fans didn't want Brian Vincent to go. UAB fans haven't been happy with Trent Dilfer from the minute he walked in that door to the minute we're talking about him right now. You look at the job that Brian Vincent's done at Louisiana Monroe, a program that has consistently been a bottom feeder at Group of Five football level, that was within a game of being bowl eligible this season. Had an incredible year behind Brian Vincent, a program that, supports its players, is community-led and community-based, and everything that should be good about a Group of Five program at the college football level. And Brian Vincent embodies that. And he could have been the UAB head coach, but instead you have Trent Dilfer, who, consistently looks out of his depth and underqualified for the job that he has. So, yeah, I think you talk about coaches being on the hot seat. It's February. Let's have our hot seat special now, and we'll talk about Trent Dilfer, how we used to talk about Jim Harbaugh before he won a national championship, and how we used to talk about Ryan Day before he won a national championship.
Maybe that's it. Trent Dilfer, UAB national champions, 2026.
First. February the
4th. There's no excuse for hitting someone around the head with a clipboard. You should be fired.
He didn't do that. That was just an over exaggeration of an example. But you see some of the shouting and roping, and for me, it crosses a line between what you should expect at a push to see on a sideline. I think it goes beyond some of the stuff. Goes beyond that. So
you just relax, bro. It makes your life better when you relax a little bit when you're coaching. Trust me.
He's 7-17. There's not much relaxing going on, Alex. I tell you that. He's probably more surprised than anybody. He's got a third season out of it.
Yeah, fair play. Not everyone can be 10-0 in conference. It's fine.
You blow your trumpet, Alex. You feel free to blow as much as you want. That's all from us on this episode. We thank you for listening. We don't typically look at our viewing figures, but at the year end we had a quick look and we're remain a little staggered by the number of people who actually listen to us. So thank you for that. Thank you to Ollie and Alex for their brilliant input. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and well, and catch you.